general discussion. And I think that will really give us the opportunity to think about next steps. What are the next things we ought to be doing? Or what does all this mean? And we really look forward to feedback from the guests on the line, the USDA and FAS folks on the line, to gather your inputs. So without further ado, you didn't come to hear me talk. You came to hear our experts. So first, we will have Nick Gardner, who's the Senior Vice President of Sustainability and Multilateral Affairs at the U.S. Dairy Export Council. I'm going to turn it over to Nick, who will now give us a presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Jim. It looks like slides are gonna work here. It's always fun to be the first person to go. Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see some friends here. For those that don't know me, as Jim said, Nick Gardner, Senior VP, Sustainability and Multilateral Affairs with USDEC. Why is USDEC going to spend the next 10 minutes or so telling you about our domestic sustainability initiatives? That is because we believe in order for U.S. dairy producers to compete in global marketplaces now and into the future, it's critical that our sustainability initiatives move forward successfully. Our ability to compete with our key competitors in regions like Europe and New Zealand is going to be based upon our ability to differentiate ourselves on our sustainability commitments and progress. Next slide, please. Quick snapshot here of U.S. dairy. We've got just over 9 million cows in the United States, a little over 31,000 dairy farms. The vast majority are family owned, and our herd size there, just under 300 head, is actually smaller than New Zealand, which claims to be the most sustainable. So if we're just looking at the numbers, our average herd size is a little smaller than theirs. Next slide, please. All of our sustainability commitments really are founded around our 2050 goals. These goals were agreed to in 2020 by the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the keys here are GHG neutrality, which covers all three of our greenhouse gases. That includes methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. Optimizing water use really through effective recycling, and then improving water quality by utilizing manure and nutrients. And that gets to some of our ecosystem services as well. Next slide, please. As I said, the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy is capable of representing the entire U.S. industry. We have all of the big trade associations here, on the policy side. In addition to USDEC, we have NMPF, DMI, our main checkoff organization, as well as a number of dairy companies and co-ops. And why this is critical is this is the type of very broad net that it's going to take to bring the solutions to address the challenges that the industry is facing and achieve those very ambitious goals. 27 board companies, almost 400 engaged through a series of committees and task forces, alliances, and our sort of PR effort. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those task forces and alliances in a moment. Next slide, please. Two main strategies that will help us achieve our 2050 goals. One really focuses on the farm and the field, and the other is on the processor side. And I'll spend the majority of my time today talking about the field and farm, which is our net zero initiative, but happy to get into our processor work a bit as well. So the net zero initiative, or NZI, is really an effort to help build the capacity, the piloting, and the research that our farmers are going to need to achieve our goals. So really focused on piloting, really focused on developing new markets that will help pay for the practice changes that we need. And critically important to understand about our goals, we aren't saying that every farm is going to achieve GHG neutrality. What we're talking about is committing to that as an industry. And so we're thinking about ways that we can scale and make affordable and accessible the practices that we'll need to achieve our goals as a collective aggregate industry. We have to think about our over 9,000 plain sec dairy farmers. We have to think about technologies and practices that can be implemented, say, by Amish producers, as well as our very largest dairies. And frankly, the diversity in how dairy is produced in the United States is staggering. Sometimes it's even different, in neighboring farms. So we have to have lots and lots of options, no one single path towards achieving our goals. And this NZI program is really intended to be an accelerator. We're looking at ways to address environmental impact of feed, ways to reduce enteric methane, that is methane that occurs through and from the cow in the process of digestion, managing manure more efficiently, and also looking to optimize energy use and really look for opportunities to promote green energy. On the processor side, again, through the Innovation Center, we have about 40 participants that represent over 20 organizations. And here we are specifically focused on reducing GHG from processing facilities. There's been a tremendous amount of work on packaging and an area from an export perspective that we're becoming increasingly concerned about as packaging regulations become new barriers for market access. Dealing with waste, and I'm really, really proud of some of our processor working group members that only have about 1% of their total waste stream going into landfill. Obviously, some lessons we can learn from them. And importantly, reducing water use and improving water reclaiming, recycling within the processing facility. Again, I'm really going to focus on NZI over the next few slides, but happy to talk about processor work as well when we get to the Q&A. Next slide, please. So our NZI collaborating partners here, you can see the breadth and the sort of diversity of folks that we're engaged with. We have industry, we have corporate, we have NGO, we have research partners, and most importantly, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We don't expect that practice changes and research is going to be put on the backs of our farmers. We also don't expect USDA to do it all for us, although obviously as much help as we can get is critical. And we're raising money between 2020 and 2021, 31 million in external support. And this is going to go to piloting, research, and implementation of practice change at the farm level to chart the path for our producers. Next slide, please. So this is a really nice graphic that shows where our GHG contributions are on farm and some of the specific interventions that we're using to try and address them. So feed production accounts for about 26% of our GHG. Just to put this into perspective, depending upon where you are, what farm, but as an aggregate, we're between 40 and 50% of feed that is fed to our cows is produced by our dairy farmers. We also feed a lot of what would otherwise be, food waste would otherwise go into landfill. But when you're talking about crops produced, it's about 40 to 50%. So a huge opportunity to implement no and low-till farming practices, increase cover cropping, better nutrient management, better water use, and certainly precision ag. Enteric methane, probably one of our biggest challenges, our hardest, but lots of opportunity there through diet management, genetic improvement. Some of these genetics have already started to help, but certainly lots of opportunity to go. Cow comfort, cow care, critical, and then lots of opportunities in feed additives. Energy, again, I stress renewable energy opportunities for that, and energy efficiency, just changing out, for example, on farms that aren't plugged into the electric grid. We mentioned the Plains Sec, the Amish. Can we substitute diesel generators for solar panels? Those are the types of solutions that can really make a big difference. And then manure, obviously looking at ways to expand access to digesters, looking at how we can actually monetize manure, how we can use technologies that create new revenue streams for our farmers, or make application easier for them so that they're able to treat manure on farm and then get stuff that they can use directly in crop production. Next slide, please. So what does success look like? For us, obviously we are talking about accelerating progress and helping our diverse dairy industry to achieve our goals. We want to achieve our GHG neutrality objective. We wouldn't have agreed to it collectively as an industry if we didn't think we could do it. But really, really important, I think it gets lost sometimes in the GHG conversation right now. We are looking to water as being one of the key areas for us to bring solutions to the world as water scarcity and water becomes a bigger issue in many of our markets. We want to help enable other industries and communities to be more sustainable. That's going to be through, bio-based products. That's going to be through renewable energy. That's going to be providing services to the community, like using our digesters to take more local waste. We have a lot of success stories of that can be broadened. We need to build new revenue sources and new revenue streams. We have to find ways for our farmers to be rewarded for making, process changes, infrastructure changes, and that's going to be through being paid for some of this. And we want to be a catalyst for broader change, because ultimately we think there's an opportunity here to reimagine U.S. dairy's role in a sustainable food system. And as I said in the beginning, and we can move to the next slide here because this is going to be my final message. As I said in the beginning, what we need as a U.S. dairy export community is to have our sustainability objectives clearly communicated and well on the way of demonstrating progress towards them, because they will be a critical differentiator for our exporters, a huge way that we are building and maintaining market access, and ultimately a key differentiator for U.S. dairy against some of our European and Kiwi competitors in particular. So with that, I will conclude. Back to you, Jim, and thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thank you so much, Nick, and you were spot on with your 10 minutes. So kudos for the internal timekeeping you did. So thank you very much. And I just want to call out, I heard there at the end you were talking about all of the work that your farmers and your industry is doing, making U.S. dairy a critical giving you a critical differentiator versus your competition. And I would just say, I think that's something that will probably be consistent across the various commodities we hear from today. I know the previous time we did that, that was one of the things, and certainly I think it's a goal for everybody that works on this, and it's a benefit that we have of being part of this U.S. ag system. So well done. Does anybody, let's take a couple of minutes if anybody has a burning question for Nick while they're top of mind. Otherwise, we'll go on to the next presentation. Question? Speak up if there is one. You can put it in the chat also. All right, well, I'm not seeing one, so you really gave him some good information, Nick, and we will look forward to the Q&A session a little later. Okay, next up, we have Michael Snow, who's the Executive Director of the American Hardwood Export Council. And I think, if I understood correctly, Michael is coming to us, he's not in a US time zone right now. He is out promoting American Hardwood at a meeting maybe in Dubai. Have I got that correct, Mike?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, thank you for staying up late and being with us. Over to you, sir.
That's interesting. Thank you very much. This is going to be, I apologize in advance that I'm going to speak very, very quickly, because this is very difficult for us to get within 10 minutes, because going back about 20 years, sustainability, when you're talking about wood products, is, sustainability and environmental impacts has been front and center, not only for market access around the world, but also for increasing the use of wood. And it's been something that we've spent an awful lot of time and energy on. So I want to spend a little bit of time now just giving you the background on the U.S. hardwood industry. Unlike any of the wood companies that you've probably heard of, Weyerhaeuser, Georgia Pacific, Boise Cascade, I'm willing to bet that 99.9% of you have never heard of a hardwood company. And that's because they tend to be they're all, without question, they're all, SMEs. Many of them are multi-generational family businesses. And the other portion of it that I think that's critical when we talk about sustainability is that they do not own the forests where that timber comes from. We get very little off of public lands, and the United States has about close to nearly 5 million individual landowners. A typical sawmill is going to harvest timber from, or is going to buy timber from 300 to 400 different landowners every year. The next year is going to be 300 to 400 completely different, usually family forest landowners. The response that everybody looks to is certification. The Forest Stewardship Council, backed by World Wildlife Fund, chain of custody certification sounds great. Doesn't work for us, and the reason is those 4 to 5 million individual landowners, they will harvest once or twice a generation off of their land. So they're clearly not interested in paying money to an FSC or something every year to tell them what they already know about their forest, so that the ability of the sawmills to get timber, in log form that comes from a certified forest is almost impossible in the United States because of the fragmentation of the ownership. So what we've been forced to do is find other ways to discuss sustainability, to discuss low environmental impacts and so forth. It's important to keep in mind that we don't work with plantations. Hardwoods in the United States are harvested naturally. They'll go into a forest, remove the larger trees before they die, cut those. It allows the rest of the forest, the sun to hit the forest floor, the rest of the trees, the small trees, to come up around them. And we know that from a carbon sequestration point of view, having a naturally biodiverse forest not only sequesters more carbon, but it also creates a type of environment that allows plants and animals and everything else to live. So we know we're on the right track. The question is, how do we communicate this? And really, we're looking at 3 different things that we do. We have a kind of a 3-legged stool. The first is illegal timber, which is a big part of everything from the Lacey Act to the European Timber Regulation, something we've been forced to face with all along. So we've looked at how do we show that there is a low risk of illegal timber harvest in the United States. The second thing that we look at is what are the environmental impacts of wood in general, certainly compared to other materials. And then finally, on the sustainability end, we're very fortunate in the United States that we do have the Forest Service who conducts their forest inventory analysis, which is absolutely fantastic information. So how do we package the 3 of these together to really communicate the situation? The first hurdle to crack is the illegal timber. We commissioned back in 2007 our first study, our first risk assessment that went through, looked through county by county across the hardwood producing regions of the U.S. Looked at, well, of course, there is timber that's stolen from different places, usually because the difference between one person's land and somebody else's is not always clear. But essentially, the result of that study show that the risk is absolutely negligible, that illegally harvested timber in the United States, for the very reason that these small landowners know precisely what they have, and if somebody cuts on their land, they will know it. So it's a big benefit, but we've got to be able to put this into peer-reviewed, scientifically valid data, which is what we did. We renewed it in 2017 because it had been 10 years, 2018. It had been 10 years since we did the original study. And again, having it peer-reviewed and scientifically valid is very important. And you'll notice one of the reviewers from the 2018 study, Ann Bartuska, I'm sure is known to many of you, the former chief scientist of the U.S. Forest Service and of the USDA in general. Our second portion we did, going back about 12 or 13 years, is look at the life cycle impacts of wood, particularly wood versus other materials. We went through and looked at all, not just greenhouse gas emissions, but all of the different life cycle impact, from forestry to bringing the logs to the sawmill, kiln drying, and then even including the exports to foreign markets. So kiln to port, port to port, and port to customer. And what we're able to do with that is actually measure all of the environmental impacts. This slide focuses on the greenhouse gas emissions, of course, the global warming, which is what most people look at. The big ace in the hole that wood has is that essentially half the weight of a dry log is carbon. And every kilogram of kiln-dried hardwood, no matter what species is, every kilogram by weight carries within it the equivalent of 1.6 kilograms of CO2, and that's sequestered and remains in that wood for as long as that product is in place, as a table or a chair or a floor or anything else. As long as that's not burned or allowed to decay, that carbon remains sequestered. And if we take a look at what that is, that 1.6 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, and then we look at what all of the carbon emissions involved in everything from, we talked about before, from forest to kiln, kiln drying, sawing, transportation, and even shipping it overseas. In all those cases, the amount of carbon emitted is well below the carbon that's already stored in that. So in other words, we can hand kiln dried lumber to any port around the world as a carbon negative, not carbon neutral, a carbon negative material. So how that's used, here, just one example, Purdue University took our data on the hardwoods and actually did a study looking at a solid white oak chair, and then looking at a new plastic chair, a recycled plastic chair, a new aluminum chair, and a recycled aluminum chair, because a lot of people have an idea that just because something's recycled, it has low environmental impacts. And again, the science doesn't actually come that way. And if we look at, particularly all the different ones, but ozone depletion, global warming, every single one, the green here is the wooden chair. And the environmental impacts across the board are well below anything, including the recycled aluminum, the recycled plastic. So again, getting this information in the hands of architects, designers, furniture designers, and foresters is absolutely critical. And we know from our evaluations that these messages are getting across. This is something that we've done. Specifiers, we mean essentially architects, interior designers, furniture designers, building contractors, developers, that information, being able to provide the information on the life cycle of wood versus other materials, between those that say it's much more likely and those that's somewhat more likely, we're talking more than 8 and 10. About 85% that say, yes, this does figure into the comments. So we do know that this is important for our target audiences moving forward. The next one, we talk about sustainability, and this is where we've been very lucky because the Forest Service does this forest industry analysis every year. It gives us fantastic information. We know that the standing timber in the American hardwood forest has more than doubled in the last 60 years, more than doubled in the last 60 years. I mean, that's sustainability under any definition. We know what our growth to removal ratios are, 2.4 to 1. So for every tree that's either harvested, is cut down because we're going to be building houses or a highway there, or that dies naturally, for each one that dies, 2.4 new trees come into effect. And I think that's something that, how do you get that information out? And the FIA data is fantastic, but the problem is it comes out as 8,000 pages of Excel spreadsheets that are very difficult to wrap your head around. So what we did is we took all that information, put it into a interactive forest map of the United States. And you can go for the United States in general, or you can go state by state, and even in some areas, even down to the county level. You can pick the species you want, or all species, and it's going to give you what the growth over that year was, what the removals, including mortality, what the net growth is, and what the standing timber is in each state. So again, an architects are saying, I want to get cherry from North Carolina. How do I know that that's sustainable? This information is available, widely available now on our website, and we found it a fantastic communications tool. The other part we've done is, as part of that communication as well, is put in the life cycle information that I talked about before, but also a replacement rate. And we found this to be really effective in talking to, again, architects and consumers at large, because often the question is, yeah, we love this, that staircase, the floor is great, but how many trees did you have to cut down to do that? And what we're able to do with this is we're able to actually calculate, based on our growth to removal ratios, species by species, exactly how long it takes the forest to regenerate the wood that we use. And here we have white oak, for example. For every cubic meter of white oak that we use, it takes 1.7 seconds for that white oak to be replaced in the forest. And we found that really changes the conversation. I was just here today at the US. We do have a lot of red oak at the US Pavilion here at the Expo, the World's Fair here in Dubai. Back in 2015, we donated the floor also to the US Pavilion at the World's Fair in Italy, in Milan. And again, taking that information, we had a 500 square meter solid white oak desk, or solid white oak floor throughout the US Pavilion. And again, the question is, 25 seconds is how long it took for all of that. This is 2 stories, how long it took for that wood to be replaced. And that's really changing the conversation, which is what we're looking for. We do this in a lot of our projects that we do, whether it's showing, furniture, showing different ways of manufacturing. We're able now to provide this information, not only what the environmental impacts are, but also how quickly that wood is replaced in the forest. And we've really found that's kind of changed We put together an advertising campaign that we were challenged on almost immediately in the UK to show the science behind it. But you hear so much on, in the tropics, there's 10 football fields a second or whatever they're using now that's disappearing. We actually have the opposite. We have every 2 minutes, the US hardwood forest is actually growing by the size of the football field. So we launched an ad campaign around this and, purposefully trying to create a little bit of, I don't want to say controversy, but to get people to think, because this goes against most people's preconceived notions about the forest disappearing. Yeah, there's areas that they are, but certainly not here in the United States. And again, we found that doing this, that we've had big changes now in our target audiences on what they think about US forest management. And just going back between 2017 and 2020, we don't have our 2021 evaluation yet, but we've seen even in Europe, a big jump from 66% that think that the US is somewhat or much better than other countries at the forest, up to 84% in the Middle East, South America. So we're seeing across the board that this message is getting through, that even though we don't have, quote, certified timber, the US forest is doing the right thing. And that's been a big part of our pushing forward. And essentially we take all this information.
Couple more minutes, Mike, please.
To exports, to exporters, and we call it American Hardwood Environmental Profile, where they can get all this information. This is designed for the European timber regulation, but also for the Lacey Act, for furniture coming back into the US, provides the legality information, provides the growth to removal information, provides the life cycle information. And I'm just going to end with 2 things that are coming up that we're working on now in the future. One of them is really exciting, is stable isotope ratio, this World Forest ID. We're working with the Forest Service International. This is already being used by the Justice Department to sniff out illegal timber coming into the US, but we think it can also be used to show legal timber leaving the US. So we're doing a pilot project right now in Kentucky with white oak, where we're taking samples, and now we're able to show exactly where that, because that's always been on the chain of custody. It's always been our issue. Yeah, it's great information, but doesn't tell me where this piece of wood came from. This World Forest ID project can actually do that for us. And we want to turn that into what we believe could be a very big step forward for our industry. And that's really creating our own certification system based on jurisdiction or landscape certification, which is already being done for things like wood pellets. And it's way too complex to get into now, but this is something that we have on the horizon moving forward. And with that, I think I'm pretty close to 10 minutes, so I will go ahead and log off.
Wow, great presentation, Mike. And I don't know about other people in the audience, but I learned an awful lot about what Hardwood is doing there. That's fantastic things you've got going on. So does anybody have a real quick question for Mike before we move on to the next presentation? Okay, not seeing one jump up. Thank you for that. I love the comparison of the chairs, the wood chair example versus others. That's really something. Okay, you'll be able to stay on for the other Q&A session, won't you, Mike? Okay,
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you. Okay, next we will move on to the American Peanut Council. And one of my favorite foods is peanuts, so I'm quite anxious to hear about this one myself. Eric Cornell, the Director of Sustainability for the Peanut Council, will be giving us a presentation. So Eric, over to you.
Thank you. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk about the peanut industry. You are witnessing basically the birth of this program. I was hired by the American Peanut Council about 3 months ago, and we're just very excited to where we are as a peanut industry and where things are moving forward. Next slide. So we just wanted to give a quick overview of the peanut industry. All peanuts are produced in the Southeast, a little bit of Virginia, Southwest. Previous slide, sorry. And yields have been increasing for a long time. There is almost a 70% yield increase from the year 2000 up to the present. There is a lot of great work by the universities, USDA, to produce new varieties every season or every couple of seasons to be able to be more efficient, produce more, and produce a high quality crop. There are about 7,000 or so peanut farmers in the United States. Many of them rotate peanuts with cotton and other crops. And exports are crucial, are very important to the peanut industry. About 33% of all peanuts, American peanuts, were exported in 2020, and that value dropped to 23% in the past year in 2021. Next slide. Just as a basics, peanuts are a legume, but they're considered a culinary nut. So for example, if you are a European buyer of nuts, you will buy almonds, cashews, pistachios, and peanuts as well. So although many peanut producers compare themselves, to other row crops, it's important to keep in consideration that peanuts do compete with other tree nuts and other products like that. They have a very low input requirements. So for example, many regions have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium requirements of very low or almost zero. They do apply calcium, about half a ton of lime every season or so, especially if they're seed producers. But for the most part, they're very resource efficient, very low water use, and crop protection in terms of fungicides are really important to protect the quality of the product. Next slide. This is from Field to Market, the latest presentation, the latest report from Field to Market, the National Indicators Report. What you see is the greenhouse gas emissions, for example, for peanuts have been reducing for the past 20 years or so. Now, there have been some stalling in the past 5 years, but for the most part, peanuts have been improving both per acre and per pound of peanuts. Next slide. The story of American peanuts is great. The basics of our program is that peanuts have a great story, which just haven't had a formalized way to collect it over time. And that's why we have launched a Sustainable US Peanuts Initiative. There has been record consumption of peanuts for many years in the past few years, but even though there is huge consumption of peanuts in the United States, we still have peanuts left over for export, and it's extremely important to be able to place them and compete in the world market. Next slide. The peanut industry has been exploring sustainability initiatives for a long time. Since 2007 or so, we have collaborated with universities to do life cycle assessments. We have been included in the Field to Market platform and the National Indicators Report. Since 2018, we have been collaborating with National Peanut Board, the Georgia Peanut Commission, Cotton Incorporated, to build a framework for data collection to show the great sustainability story of American peanuts, and to show the environmental footprint to growers so they can learn and improve over time. The major message that I have now is we have released a grower platform to be able to capture this field level information from American peanut farmers, and we are in the process of collecting, having growers participate in this framework. Next slide. The basic is that this program is an online platform that we have built in collaboration with the cotton industry. So if you know, many of you participated in the December briefing, you saw the presentation from the Cotton Trust Protocol. We have followed their template as a peanut industry to be able to have, over time, a grower can agree to do data sharing with the cotton industry. So data collection is much easier when cotton and peanuts collaborate and growers do that rotation. Many peanut farmers also grow cotton, so it's a lot of efficiencies to be found working across the rotation. And for many growers that they just grow cotton and peanuts in rotation, this program within the cotton and the peanut industry basically captures all their field level sustainability metrics, and it's extremely important to raise awareness about this work. The enrollment into the grower platform, it takes about an hour per year. And the idea is to be able to capture this sustainability footprint over time to see how it improves with new varieties, new technologies, and intentional improvements that we try to make. Farmers will also receive second and third party verifications. A random subset of growers will be verified to be able to basically build international credibility on the information. Next slide. One of the major intangible benefits, I would say, for growers, and that's something that we try to raise awareness, is we need this sustainability framework, this program, these messages to be able to compete against other countries that produce peanuts. As you see, 23% of American peanuts were exported in 2021, and the major destinations are Mexico, Canada, China, and the rest of the world. So we hope that as more farmers participate in this grower platform, that we can have the data that we need to first promote continuous improvement and also build sustainability message to promote American peanuts in the world markets. Next slide. And you can click one more time. The basic is a grower goes through all these 6 steps, but only step 4, the self-assessment, and then step 6 are the most time-consuming steps. Next slide. So for step number 4, the self-assessment, a grower acknowledges and reads all these questions and indicates that they're in compliance or what type of management they're doing. So they'll see questions about soil health, nutrient management, biodiversity, farm management, worker questions. So these are about 100 or up to 115 questions. We estimate that it takes them about 20 to 40 minutes per year to complete. Next slide. This is the field level environmental information that farmers will be completing. We have questions about rotation, habitat, irrigation, the yield, all the operation, the nutrient management, crop protection, and so forth. And they get a lot of valuable information out of this. This should take them about 30 minutes per year to complete. Next step. So one of the major benefits for growers that we think is that they will be able to get environmental metrics at the field level. So for example, for each field that they enter into the platform, they're going to be able to see metrics for greenhouse gas emissions per pound of peanuts and per acre. They'll be able to see the soil erosion, the soil carbon, the likelihood of soil carbon accumulation or depletion. They'll be able to see information about irrigation water use and many other metrics like biodiversity, water quality that are extremely important to start keeping track of, and be able to help growers find opportunities for improvement, and also to use this information to build messages to defend the peanut industry against other world markets. Farmers will also be able to see state and national benchmarks out of the field to market platform. And this has been extremely important for us to be able to promote it and to promote, when we don't have any payments or incentives, monetary incentives, this is a way to provide valuable information back to growers. Next slide. So in terms of what help we could receive in terms of USDA. So something critical is be able to have some incentive or something to offer to farmers to participate in these programs. Also, this is for agriculture as a whole. There are so many platforms, data systems, data collection languages. It would be great to have something that we can build from the ground up to be able to capture all crops in a common way. For example, if you have a corn, peanut, soybean grower, that all the data makes sense and it matches in the same, that it flows in a way that makes sense for the industry. Also having able to have better or more regional data about agricultural inputs like nitrogen, what's the environmental footprint of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and fungicides, and so forth. We have information coming from field to market, but I know that it could be improved upon, and we could use help from USDA for that. And also for many growers that they have been applying conservation practices for decades, it's important for them to receive credit, to not be discouraged, that because they have been doing something for a long time that it doesn't have value in the current marketplace. So that's something that we see as a barrier of so many growers that have done so many great adoption practices over time to receive credit for all they do. So the basics of our program is first to invite growers to participate so that they can learn about the environmental footprint. And using that information, the peanut industry will use sustainability message to defend and promote American peanuts in the marketplace. That is very competitive. And that's my presentation. If there are any questions.
Excellent, Eric. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Any
and of
questions?
course, I'll stay for the Q&A at the end as well.
Okay, great. Good. Thank you. Any questions for Eric, peanut specific, or hold those until the people are waiting till the end? All right, not seeing any question right now for Eric. Hope everybody's jotting a few down as we get into the Q&A session here in a little bit. So thanks, Eric. Okay, and batting cleanup here with our presentations today is Steve Linscomb. Steve is the Executive Director of the Rice Foundation of the USA, right, as a part of the USA Rice Federation. So, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's definitely my pleasure to be here today. as Mike was talking earlier about the hardwood industry, same situation in the U.S. rice industry. We have multi-generational farmers. In fact, I spent most of my career with LSU as a rice breeder in Southwest Louisiana, and we have about 4 operations in that area that are 6th generation. So the 6th generation of rice farmers are producing rice on the same ground that has been produced in their family for many years. And point to be made there is these folks are looking at their kids taking over these operations, and sustainability is extremely important here because they want to leave their farms for their children in better shape than they found it when they took over the operation. Rice is produced in 6 major states: Arkansas, California, Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, and Texas. A little bit of rice production as well in Southern Illinois and Florida, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So USA Rice is an umbrella operation that represents farmers, millers, merchants, and end users as well. Next slide. So just a snapshot of what I was mentioning earlier of the U.S. rice industry. We grow all types of rice, long, medium, short grain, as well as aromatic and specialty varieties. About 1.2 million hectares planted on average annually. About 85% of the rice consumed in the U.S. is grown in the U.S. And as I mentioned, the 6 major rice producing states. Next slide. So Arkansas produces about half of the rice produced in the U.S. Other major states, California, Louisiana, and some acreage generated in Texas, Missouri, and Mississippi. Next slide. So we think that the rice industry has a very, very rich history of resource stewardship. And in fact, one of the first things I did when I went to work for the Federation about 4.5 years ago was we embarked on an effort to kind of just put on paper what we have done from a sustainability standpoint historically. And I think we've got a pretty good story to tell. If you look at the different, we went back about 35 years and looked at what has happened in the rice industry. We've seen that we have improved land use efficiency by almost 40%, improved water use efficiency by 52%. A lot of this data is based on, as Eric was saying earlier, the National Indicators Report from Field and Market. So I think we've got the data to back up these claims we are making here. And we're doing all of this while increasing production and farmer profitability. Next slide. So if we look at some of the other metrics, we've decreased soil erosion 28%. Again, land use efficiency is up 39%. Next slide. And we've really focused on doing our, rice is grown in the United States as a flood irrigated crop. We've really done a lot of different things to improve our water use efficiency, such as continuous flooding. We use what we call Manure, which is multiple inlet rice irrigation. In a lot of historical rice production, you put water at the higher elevation into the field, and it cascades down through the field. What Manure does is you're flooding all the different cuts at the same time, which really improves the efficiency of using that irrigation water. We use practices such as alternate wetting and drying, which lets the water come down in the field and you expose the soil. What this does, it uses less water, and it also dramatically decreases the amount of methane produced in rice. We also are seeing a lot more what we call furrow irrigation or row rice, which actually the field or most of the field is not flood irrigated the entire season, but we push water down the furrows to make sure that we got adequate water for the crop to produce the highest yields possible. And we have a lot of tailwater recovery systems utilized in a lot of farmers' fields. So this has allowed us to use 52% less water than we were using 35 years ago. Next slide. And also from energy use and air quality, we have decreased our greenhouse gas emissions. I mentioned methane because rice is typically grown flood irrigated. We do produce more methane than most upland crops. Over a 36-year period, energy use in the U.S. rice has decreased by 34%. We're showing solar systems here, really are seeing a lot more of these. We have a lot of rice drying systems totally powered by solar systems. Next slide. And one thing that rice can really hang its hat on is habitat creation and biodiversity. In fact, studies have been done that would show that it would take $3.4 billion if we were to produce wetlands to emulate the habitat created by rice fields. And we know that over half of North America's waterfowl winter in one of the rice producing regions, and this overlaps with virtually all of the rice lands in America. Next slide. And rice is also, we consider a socio-economic powerhouse. Really important. Only 3 million acres of rice that, when compared to like soybeans and corn and wheat and some of the other major crops, not huge in the United States, but it's very, very important in those regions where rice is produced. Next slide. And we have set sustainability goals. The industry by 2030, we hope to increase land use efficiency by 10%, decrease soil loss by 8%, decrease greenhouse gas emissions by 13%, decrease water use by 13%, and also add to our biodiversity goals by about 10%. Next slide. And with that, I'll wrap it up and be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Steve. Great presentation. It's fun to see all of the various pictures of the various ways the crops are produced and all of those kind of things. That's great. Okay, well, hopefully people have been gathering a few questions or some comments. So I am just gonna open it up and see who would like to start us off from a question perspective or a comment perspective. I see Jason with his hand up. Jason, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to the group for the very interesting presentations. You guys have definitely put your thoughts into how to tell your story, and you did a good job. All 4 of the presentations I thought were really informative and easy to follow. So let me ask a question like this. It's kind of a general one, but I was recently given a talk to an apple industry group that was in town, and I talked about how we are so focused on sustainability and how we are trying to encourage better performance by all farmers all over the world, but doing so in a way that still meets the need to feed the planet, keep rural economies strong, and protect the planet. So I was asked a good question I didn't really give a very good answer to. And I'll say it like this. I explained that we're both trying to encourage better techniques for farmers and processors and retailers and distributors that are more sustainable environmentally. But at the same time, we're guarding against other countries trying to block our products from their markets under the guise of or misguided sustainability rubrics. And I talked about how we really see innovation, adopting new and better practices as critical to solving this problem. So that's sort of the framework that we look at it, that I look at it. And the question came back to me was, well, where have you seen a country implement the right kind of market infrastructure and policy inducements or penalties that really do have an effect of delivering on sustainability objectives? And, I think we're pretty clear that we don't have enough money to subsidize all the kind of sustainable practices we want. I don't think we're smart enough to regulate our way there. And that's why we're very keen to have a market-based approach where farmers get rewarded, they get some sort of premia for delivering more virtuous products. And so I guess my answer was, well, on the one hand, we are trying to nudge farmers through inducements, which include government programs as well as market benefits. And we're also trying to nudge them away from things that are bad. So discourage overuse of inputs, for example, or discourage cropping patterns that are not protecting topsoil. So that kind of was my weak answer. I'm curious to hear from you all who are in the mix, like, what do you see as an effective environment that a government that we can do? We can set up an effective market with the appropriate government nudges. So very open question, but curious to hear what you all have to say on that.
Thanks, Jason. I think that is a good question that you received. So let's just go in the order of our presenters, just to kind of keep it in line. And Nick, we'll go to you first, and then we'll just work our way down the list.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And Jason, a good question that I'm sure all four of us will have some unique perspective on. I think from the dairy industry, we haven't seen an example out there of another government doing this right. And when we look at some of what's going on in the Netherlands or in Europe more generally, we're not seeing an understanding of how we can continue to support production, either at current levels or even increasing production to meet that nutrition security, food security challenge that we know we have in the global marketplace, while also reducing environmental impact. And things may be a little bit better in New Zealand, where their farmers and beef and dairy industry in particular have been involved in setting some of the targets and have had a little bit of additional runway for implementation. But it follows a very similar model. And from an export perspective, we see an opportunity to be that source of choice. And so we have to find a way to both produce more for growing global demand while also reducing environmental impact. And honestly, I think that the sustainable productivity approach that has grown out of the UN Food Systems Summit is embodied in part in Aim for Climate. It's the right paradigm in which to be thinking about this. It's incentivizing innovation. It's looking for opportunities to support piloting, spending money where or supporting farmers that are blazing the path rather than trying to create the model into which everyone must fall. But particularly around envisioning a future where we are producing more, but we're reducing our impact. I think you're right. I think regulating our way towards a solution is not going to work, and that is why our industry has really leaned forward with voluntary practice change, voluntary goals. So I think that the last sort of comment I'd make here is that looking at ways that you can incentivize industry level, sort of broad opportunities like our innovation center, like sort of DMI or nutrient led efforts that bring together large co-ops, bring together many farmers, to sort of blaze the trail, and then allow the marketplace and the competitive space to drive and select the innovations and practices that are implemented. I think that's going to be the solution, at least in the next 5 to 10 years. Beyond that, we may need a different approach, but with that, I'll yield back, Jim.
Great, thanks, Nick. Very interesting perspective. Let's go to Mike about hardwood.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure I'm going to directly answer your question, but the one thing when we look at our partnership with the USDA and with Post Overseas and the U.S. government in particular, I think it's really important to support that when other countries, and I'm talking primarily Europe right now, but we know that what Europe does, and things like the UTR are often copied by Australia, New Zealand, and Japan and other countries. We need to make sure that regulations are not being proposed as simple solutions to very complex problems. And a reading, for example, of the EU, their new Green Deal as it relates to forestry presents some, I think, really difficult challenges for our industry. And one of those is they're talking about not just forest loss, but what they're describing as forest degradation. And one of the definitions that they have as far as forest degradation is actions that change the species mix in a forest. We're in a situation right now in the United States, as I showed before, we have a rapidly expanding forest. And a big reason for that was, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, a lot of agriculture shifted from the east to the Midwest and further west, and a lot of land that had been cleared, in the 17th and in the 18th and early 19th centuries, reverted back to forest land. Well, that worked very well for species mix, particularly about things like white oak, which, as you know, is what's used for wine barrels and whiskey barrels, and it's one of the most sought after species. That regrows very well. It's what's called a shade intolerant species. So when you have big open areas, like we had with the conversion of agricultural lands back to forest land on the East Coast, white oak did very well. Those trees now are all maturing. And the way that harvesting is done now, what they call selective harvesting, where they go in, they don't open big holes in the forest. They remove individual trees and leave everything else standing. That doesn't create an ideal situation for white oak to regenerate. So there's actually a movement in many states that are supported by the state foresters, actually supported by the U.S. Forest Service, to try to open some more larger holes in order to allow white oak to regenerate. Under the EU's proposed regulation, all of a sudden, none of that wood that results from that would be admissible into the European Union because it results in forest degradation, without even considering for a moment the fact that changing a species mix in a forest can actually be, from an environmentally perspective, a positive. So one of the things that we always deal with is we see too many examples of complex problems that people try to address by simple solutions without thinking through what the implications are. And that, from our perspective, is something we really need to guard against.
Thanks, Mike. I think that's such a great point about complex solutions for simple problems, that sometimes we don't do ourselves any favor in that way. All right, Eric, what are your thoughts related to from a peanut perspective?
Yeah, no, many of the same issues that were mentioned apply to the peanut industry as a row crop. Our approach to this sustainability program is it's a voluntary approach, and hopefully farmers will recognize the value of it over time. Like I mentioned, we don't have the funds to provide incentives like other industries do to be able to participate, learn about the footprint, and look ways for improvement. In terms of the market stage, we don't have, at the moment, we don't have a major barrier for American peanuts due to sustainability. There may be in the future, but the peanut industry does look closely, pesticide regulations from Europe and other things coming up, or different grading issues in terms of, for example, aflatoxin levels between American standards and European or other country standards. So that's something that it's a large issue that the American Peanut Council is tackling. And also one major goal of this program that we start as a peanut industry is to be proactive and come ahead of any other standards or sustainability programs that may be imposed by an external market or other world market that may want to impose a program on American farmers. So hopefully by the framework that we have built, we can be proactive and come ahead and be able to tell this story our way. But yeah, we do have many of the same issues that were mentioned.
Great. Thanks, Eric. I think that proactivity is so important. Okay, and finally, Steve, any final comments on comments on this topic?
Yeah, and I would echo a lot of the things that have been said by the other industries. I don't think any country that is a major rice producing country incentivizes sustainability both publicly and privately as much as we do here in the US. A lot of the gains that we have made that I referred to earlier, especially in water use efficiency and soil erosion, many of those metrics, a lot of NRCS programs are very, very helpful in allowing our farmers to do a much better job. And we are in the infancy of more private input here, but we do have some of our major end users that are starting to come around and give premiums to growers to use more sustainable practices. I mean, we think we do a very good job in sustainability to start with, but we right now have some of our major end users that are looking at programs to encourage like furrow irrigated rice and alternate wetting and drying, because it does reduce greenhouse gases. So we're seeing more and more of that, and I think that's going to be more important as we move forward.
Great, thanks, Steve. And the only thing I would just add one sort of final observation on that topic. We've seen in the soy industry for some years talk about this. And like Steve, we've seen very small premiums being paid, but more often than not, we sort of see the only way a particular industry will use a product is if it meets a standard. So, Jason, I guess both of those can work, but the more time that the more time they provide, if they give you like, here's what our program is going to be, and in 5 years' time, we're going to have these rules in place. It certainly gives us more time to get our industry geared up for that. I would just add that as a point. Jason, any follow-up from your perspective? You're muted, Jason.
Thanks. Sorry, and to abuse my position here, just a quick follow-up. I'd be curious to hear from you all. Do you feel your producers, your farmers, feel like it has been worth the effort so far to achieve these sustainability gains? I would hope that they're saving money on inputs and they're seeing more soil health and maybe they're getting a premium, but I don't know. When you take your pulse of members, has it been worth it? And how are they viewing the next step that everybody's expecting everybody to take? Is that going to be worth it or not? Just curious for a short sample.
Let's go in reverse. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I think earlier that we got multi-generational farms, and our producers are looking, especially from the standpoint of something like tailwater recovery systems. We've seen a huge increase in some of these systems that are so important to minimize water use in rice. And our producers were doing a great job in sustainability long before they ever heard the word sustainability. So I think that, yeah, they are looking at ways to decrease input costs and improve their overall operations. So I think they're doing a good job without, in many cases, even knowing that they're doing a good job in sustainability.
Yeah, good point. Eric, thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Yeah, for peanut farmers, we're trying to match what they think of sustainability in terms of what happens at the farm level versus what the industry thinks, and how all these programs try to request data on what sustainability means. So we're trying to teach as much as we can about what the industry needs, how how the sustainability has been defined by a lot of countries, a lot of programs. So it takes a lot of teaching to be able to show them. But for the most part, my experience has been that a lot of peanut farmers are already applying a lot of conservation practices, and they just need to be able to explain it in the way that matches how the industry expects the information. But it's a work in progress.
Great, thanks, Eric. Mike, from a hardwood perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting, particularly Jason's comments about, market premiums and so forth. In our industry, it's really not a question of market premiums. Even those few companies that can access certified hardwood, for example, rarely get a market premium for it. It really is basically the bottom line market access requirement. So it's not so much about premiums, but the industry has, for a long time, been doing things going back decades, by, burning the sawdust and the waste from their sawing operations to run their dry kilns. And I mean, they've been incorporating things for a long period of time, and essentially doing things that right now are being looked at from other industries like, hey, that's great. And that's been normal practice for a while, which is one of the reasons there's so much frustration from our industry. And you have large plantations in places like Russia and places like Belarus that are willing to pay money to certification systems, even though we know there's a huge difference between plantation forestry and natural forestry from an environmental perspective, and particularly from a carbon sequestration perspective. Yet we're seeing these big plantations being, rewarded in the marketplace simply because they have access to a piece of paper. And that, I think, is one of the most frustrating deals that we're doing with. We'd love to see premium being paid for truly sustainable wood. But the real thing is that it's literally the price of admission right now. It's how you stay in the market, not really about how you can gain more out of it.
Great, thanks, Mike. Nick?
I mean, Jason, I think as others have said, that there's diversity across the dairy industry. We have some early adopters and certain farmers and co-ops that are really leaning in, and I think are seeing benefits, with their brands or with their marketability as a result of that. I think some of those are ones that are more focused on export. We have others that are questioning, why now? Why do we have another commitment? Why do I need to make this investment? And really it's about answering those questions, which I think are totally reasonable and fair to be asked, by talking about how we are trying to create incentives. We are trying to look at implementing technologies that have an environmental benefit, but also boost production. And when you can talk to farmers about many of the changes that they've already made in the way they farm, I mean, we're not farming, we're not producing dairy like we did in the 50s, and a lot of those changes are to boost productivity. And when you can marry productivity and reducing environmental impact, it really makes a lot of sense, even for those farmers that are asking harder questions. The bottom line is we've got to figure out ways to really inform our producers that when we talk about reducing environmental impact, we're also talking about creating new revenue streams for them. And I think we'll get there. And I think that's going to be the solution for our industry, our sector.
Great, thanks, Nick. So great questions, Jason. Thank you.
No, thanks for letting me go first. I know there's some smarter people than me on the line from FAS.
Daniel, I see you took your mute button off. A question, sir?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jim. And listen, thanks everybody for doing this. This is more impactful than you could imagine. We had a group, and some of you were on it, over in Dubai just a few weeks ago on our first in-person trade mission. And many of us walked away with three conclusions. One, our customers were very happy to see us again. Two, they view American agriculture as being the most reliable supplier in the world, and that is more valued now than ever before. And three, they really like what we're doing in the area of sustainability, and they're already starting to see from some of their own customers the importance of sustainability. And I think what you all have shown, both this presentation as well as the previous presentation, is that we're off to a running start in this area of sustainability and what agriculture can do for climate change. I know you all are aware of the recently announced Secretary's initiative, the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities, which is designed to gather this type of intelligence, designed to promote pilot and demonstration projects to come up with these type of solutions. So my one question is, if all of the presenters could just chime in on it, are your industries looking at participating in the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities? Because I think what you all have presented is exactly the type of information we're looking for with this initiative, and can really sort of inform how we think about sustainability on a global stage and how we protect it in our international organizations and our bilateral conversations, as Jason talked about a little earlier.
Okay, great. Let's go. Thanks for that question, Daniel. Let's go around the horn again. Nick, we'll come back and start at the top of the list this time.
Sure. So simple answer, yes. I think you're going to see a variety of dairy submissions, dairy requests. The only thing I would counsel is that I think as much as we can look at opportunities that build pre-competitive, pilots and support sort of the industry as a whole, the better. But they're going to be a variety. I think across the board, you're going to see many more billions of dollars of requests than are available. I think it's absolutely the right move. Thanks for the question.
Nope, good problem to have. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nick. Mike?
Yeah, actually, we're working with a coalition, a wider industry coalition with the National Hardwood Lumber Association and some other of the groups, and we are extremely interested in putting forth, I think, a couple of applications. One on what we discussed about a really solving this problem once and for all, about a certification system. So many of our customers overseas, whether it's the IKEAs of the world and large retailers and so forth, they're in a tick box mentality. Needs to be certified. We need to have the little WWF panda, or we can't take it. We need to find a way to solve that problem. And the technology now, with things like this World Forest ID and the stable isotope, and some of the doors that have been opened now by Europe themselves, in particular on things like biofuels. One thing that really kind of sticks in our craw is the same European governments that won't buy American hardwoods for any government procurement because we don't have certified product. Those same governments have taken our, I talked about the risk assessment that we did, the illegal timber risk assessment that was done with using FAS dollars. Actually, those same European governments are using that as a basis to essentially say all wood pellets coming from the United States are essentially sustainable and no problem, and we can use those, yet they're not willing to move in that same direction for the solid timber that actually locks away carbon for long periods of time that are coming from those same forests. And I think at the very least, we need to shout out that hypocrisy and make them answer that question. But I think they've opened the door now, and we're very, very interested in moving forward. And I think that this climate initiative is perfect. And I have to say, I'm going to sleep a little bit easier now that I did find out that the deadline's been extended, so by another month or so. So that's a huge help as well.
Great, thanks, Mike. Eric, let's go to you.
Yeah, the peanut industry is going to collaborate with universities and other organizations like the cotton industry to be able to put a proposal and help the peanut year of the rotation for this climate smart proposal. So we're looking forward to it.
Okay, great. Seems almost unanimous. Let's go to you, Steve.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. USA Rice, my agency that I am working for, we are right in the middle of putting together a proposal. We also know that a number of our processors are putting together proposals as well. And as Eric said, it looks like several of our land grants will also be submitting proposals. So the $1 billion is going to be, kind of gobbled up pretty quickly, it looks like.
Great, thanks, Steve. So Daniel, there you have it, unanimous. And I can speak for one other industry that I know is putting together a proposal as well, or working with a group that is. So I think it'll be widely subscribed.
Yeah, no, and I think that's excellent news. I think running out of money, if you will, is a good problem to have. I think you all have some very, very valuable solutions to some important questions. And I think it's going to be powerful for us to represent those views on the international stage and sort of be at a point of leadership in this debate. We're not the only game in town, as fate would have it, and we've got some of our trading partners who don't see things the way we do, eye to eye in many instances, also going through their own efforts. So it's important that we capture it from those of you who are actually farming and representing farmers, and we understand your interest and are in a position to protect those interests.
Great, thank you. Well, we are drawing closer to the close of our time. Let's, if there's one more question, let's take one more question. Do I see anybody with a question? Brooke, I see. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't want to cut in on everybody. This was wonderful. I love these presentations. I watched the other one as well. And I've been talking to my colleague, Jeremy Adamson, who's also on this call, who handles the climate work for us. One of the challenges we are trying to think about is how do we present this? How do we tell this story when we're talking to, you know, when at posts? Like how do we package this in a way? Because I think you all have such good data, such stories to tell. You're already ahead of the game, and so one of the challenges we're looking at is how do we start marketing this? How do we integrate it? So it's not really a question I think anybody can answer just yet, but I put it out there because it is something we want to work on with all of you to figure out how to do that, how to identify markets where these kind of practices are going to be a selling point and things like that. So nobody really needs to answer unless you've got ideas, but we are thinking about that.
Well, great. Thanks for that comment, Brooke. And I would just say maybe from my perspective with, I think it's a great role for USAEDC to help with. And perhaps, I don't know what the best medium would be, whether we create a video, you know, that includes snippets of information from many different commodities, or a booklet or something. But I can imagine that many of the posts who get questions about this, they're not experts. They don't know the details like the four presenters we had on this call and the ones on the previous call. But if they had some talking points for each commodity, it might really help them. So it seems like something good to work on.
Yep. So I would look forward to working with you guys on that.
So thank you, Brooke. Do any of our speakers have a particular comment they want to make on that?
Jim, I have one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Steve. I'll be very brief. I think absolutely right in terms of building awareness with posts so that they are knowledgeable enough to understand and identify sort of the opportunities that exist, whether it be for a specific commodity or to promote the broader narrative. The other thought is, I think that the department has done a really good job out of the UN Food Systems Summit, appropriately focusing on sustainable productivity growth. I think that's a message that can really resonate in a lot of our markets and very, very succinctly kind of positions the other pathway in a non-antagonistic way to the approach that Europe is taking. Thanks, and sorry to interrupt, Steve.
No, the only thing I would add, as I mentioned earlier, the rice industry has put together a very comprehensive sustainability report, we call it. And we are also doing a pretty significant podcast series. Many of those do highlight our sustainability efforts. So, and I think all of the industries are doing similar things.
That's great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, as I said, I think we are probably done with our Q&A session now. That doesn't mean we're not open to further questions. So please, if you do have further questions, send them to maybe Lorena, if I can volunteer her to kind of be the collector of questions, and then we can get them to the right individual and get information back to whoever's asking the questions. Lorena, the next item on the agenda is sort of a post-briefing follow-up. What's next? Would you like to take that? We're about out of time, but I don't know if if you have a next step you want to suggest or ask about.
Sure, thanks, Jim. So two separate things. One would be a post-briefing follow-up with the presenters, and separately with FAS in terms of transmitting to FAS the PowerPoint slides and any other background material that the presenters would like to share. So that's forthcoming. Stay tuned for that. I should be sending that out this afternoon. And if you do have any questions, please send them to me, and I will make sure to send them to all the presenters so that they can respond directly and stay in the dialogue for any other related questions that might arise. So what I'll do is I'll touch base separately with the presenters and see what their schedule looks like for something maybe next week, and see what else we can send to FAS. Separately, while you're still on the screen, Jason, Danny, others, would you like, Brooke, others, would you like a third round of briefings? Because we are always happy to schedule these. We just need to work it into the calendar, but I'm happy to keep doing this. Any thoughts?
Hey, Lorraine, let us huddle up on that. These have been good, but I know it's taken a long time even to get these scheduled. So let us get back to you.
Sounds good. All right, we'll wait for your guidance, and if and when you're ready, just let us know and we'll keep this going. Okay, that's all I have, Jim.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lorena. Well, I think we're at our appointed hour, and I'm sure everybody's got more on their schedule. So I would like to thank Nick, Mike, Eric, and Steve. Great job with your presentations. Thank you very much. And all of the participants from USDA and FAS, we so value the relationship and the partnership we have. So thank you for the opportunity for us to be able to present, and thank you for the partnership. And if you have further questions, comments, feedback, we'd love to hear it. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
you all
Lorena,
your
for
time.
organizing.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a good
you.
afternoon.